There are moments in every championship season that never make the highlight reel. Moments that happen behind closed doors, in the private spaces where teams are built or broken, where the difference between a group of talented individuals and a genuine championship unit is decided not by talent alone, but by character, by ego, by the choices people make when they believe nobody is watching. This is one of those moments. And it didn't stay behind closed doors. A lineup decision. Announced by a manager who has navigated pressure, criticism, and internal conflict for years with the steady hand of someone who has learned, through hard experience, that doing the right thing and doing the popular thing are rarely the same thing. Two players, key players, players who believed their place in that lineup was guaranteed, players whose confidence in their own value to this team had perhaps grown larger than their awareness of the team itself, heard their names missing from that lineup card. And they didn't handle it quietly. What they did next, in a moment of rage that crossed every professional boundary that exists in a major league clubhouse, was not just a violation of team rules. It was a declaration. A statement about where their priorities truly lived. About what mattered to them more than the team, more than the season, more than the game they were supposedly devoted to. They destroyed Ohtani's equipment. Let that land for a moment. Not a verbal confrontation. Not a heated exchange with the coaching staff. Not a frustrated kick of a water cooler in a moment of raw emotion that everyone in baseball understands because everyone in baseball has felt that frustration. They targeted Ohtani. Specifically. Deliberately. They walked into his space and they destroyed what belonged to him. And Ohtani's response, calm, final, absolute, sent a message that echoed through every corner of that clubhouse louder than anything that had been broken. Never show your face in front of me again. Stay with us. Because what led to this moment, what it reveals about the fracture lines inside one of baseball's most scrutinized teams, and what it means for the biggest game of their season against the Mets, is a story that goes far deeper than a lineup card. Before you can understand the explosion, you have to understand the pressure that created the conditions for it. The game against the Mets was not just another game on the schedule. It was not the kind of opponent you circle in pencil and then erase if other priorities emerge. This was a circled-in permanent marker game. A game that everyone inside that organization had been aware of for weeks, had been building toward, had been quietly measuring themselves against in the privacy of their own preparation. The Mets had constructed something dangerous this season. Not just talented, dangerous in the specific way that teams become dangerous when everything comes together at the right moment. Their pitching was sharp. Their lineup had depth that made single-solution defensive strategies useless. Their confidence was the kind of confidence that builds over months of winning in tight situations and never quite deflates even when results go temporarily sideways. Roberts knew all of this. He had spent significant time with his coaching staff studying this matchup, not just in terms of individual player battles but in terms of game flow, in terms of the moments where this Mets team was most vulnerable and the moments where they were most likely to impose their will if given the opportunity. And after all of that preparation, after all of those conversations and film sessions and lineup experiments in the weeks leading up to this game, he made his decision. The lineup he posted was not the lineup everyone expected. Two names were missing that had no business being missing, according to almost everyone outside Roberts' office. Two players whose contributions to this team over the course of the season had been significant enough that their absence from the starting lineup against an opponent of this caliber felt, to those two players at least, like something beyond a tactical decision. It felt like a statement. And they were right. It was a statement. Just not the one they thought. Roberts posted the lineup with the directness that defines his management style. He did not gather the team for a lengthy explanation. He did not call the affected players into his office beforehand for a private conversation designed to soften the blow. He posted the card the way managers post lineup cards, as a decision, not a discussion. As the product of a process that had already concluded, not an opening position in a negotiation. The two players saw their names missing within moments of the card going up. The reaction was not immediate. Not outwardly. In the first seconds, there is always a processing period, the moment where the brain registers information that the emotions haven't caught up to yet. Where a person reads something, understands what they have read, and exists briefly in the space between comprehension and feeling. That space closed quickly. What followed was the kind of anger that doesn't stay controlled. The kind that builds in the chest and looks for an exit, any exit, because the alternative is containing something that has grown too large to contain. They spoke to each other. Their voices, initially low, rose with a speed that drew attention from teammates nearby who understood immediately that whatever was happening was not going to resolve itself quietly. The coaching staff was aware within minutes. Roberts was told within minutes of that. But by the time any intervention was possible, the two players had already made the choice that would define this moment permanently. They had gone to Ohtani's space. And they had made it clear, not with words, but with actions that words cannot adequately describe, exactly how they felt about a situation in which they had decided, in their fury, that Ohtani was somehow central. This is the question that the entire clubhouse was asking in the aftermath. Not rhetorically. Genuinely. With the confused urgency of people trying to understand a logic that, even in its most charitable interpretation, is difficult to follow. Roberts made the lineup decision. Roberts' name was on the card. Roberts was the authority whose judgment they disagreed with, whose choice had left them out of the biggest game in recent memory. If the anger needed a target, the logic of that anger pointed clearly in one direction. And yet it was Ohtani's equipment that was destroyed. Understanding why requires understanding something about the psychology of resentment, how it builds, how it finds its targets, and why those targets are so often not the most logical ones. Ohtani's presence on this team had, since his arrival, reorganized everything. The attention. The expectations. The internal hierarchy that every team develops organically over time and that players come to rely on as a framework for understanding their own value and their own place within the larger structure. When Ohtani arrived, that framework was reorganized around him. Not because anyone decided it should be. Not because Roberts issued a directive that changed the team's internal culture. But because Ohtani's talent, his work ethic, his global significance, and the sheer gravitational force of what he represents made reorganization inevitable. For most players, this reorganization was something they adapted to. Some embraced it. Some felt the adjustment but processed it privately and moved forward professionally. For these two players, the adjustment had never fully resolved. The lineup decision, Roberts' decision, made for baseball reasons, became the moment where unresolved resentment found its expression. And the expression it found was directed not at Roberts, not at the coaching staff, not at the system that produced the decision. It was directed at the symbol they had come to associate with everything that had changed. Ohtani's locker. Ohtani's equipment. Ohtani's space. It was wrong. Completely, indefensibly wrong. And Ohtani's response confirmed that he understood exactly what it was. There are different ways a person can respond to a violation of their personal space. Rage is one way. Escalation. Meeting the aggression with counter-aggression in a way that produces a louder, more dramatic confrontation but ultimately resolves nothing and leaves everyone in a worse position than where they started. Silence is another way. The decision to absorb what has happened, say nothing, and allow the organization to handle it through its proper channels. A mature response. A professional response. One that many experienced players would choose because it avoids additional conflict and preserves relationships that might eventually need to be rebuilt. Ohtani chose neither of these entirely. What he chose was something more precise. More final. And, in its own way, more powerful than either rage or silence. He spoke. But he spoke once. Clearly. Without theatrics and without ambiguity. Never show your face in front of me again. 7 words. Delivered with the calm of someone who has already processed the full weight of what happened and arrived at a conclusion that requires no further discussion. Not a threat. Not an invitation to argue or explain or apologize. A declaration of a boundary that was now permanent. The clubhouse heard it. And the clubhouse understood, in the way that enclosed professional spaces always understand the true weight of words spoken with that kind of finality, that something had changed. Not temporarily. Not in a way that a conversation or a team meeting or a heartfelt apology would repair in a week or a month. Something had ended. When Roberts walked into the clubhouse and assessed what had happened, his expression told a story that needed no words. He is a man who has managed through conflict before. Who has navigated the complex emotional landscape of a major league clubhouse, where enormous egos, enormous talent, and enormous pressure coexist in spaces that are physically close and psychologically intense, with a steadiness that his players have come to rely on even when they disagree with his decisions. But what he was looking at now was not a conflict he had anticipated. Not a consequence of his lineup decision that any reasonable preparation could have included in its range of possible outcomes. He had made a lineup decision. For baseball reasons. Based on careful analysis of a specific opponent and what his team needed to compete against that opponent at its highest level. What had followed was something that existed in a completely different category. He addressed the two players privately first. The contents of that conversation remained inside the room where it happened. But the outcome was visible to everyone. The two players were separated from the group, their status for the game and beyond suddenly existing in a space far more uncertain than the lineup card had originally suggested. Then Roberts addressed the team. He didn't minimize what had happened. He didn't reach for the language of unity and moving forward that managers sometimes deploy to paper over genuine fractures because the schedule demands it. He was direct about the seriousness of what had occurred. About what it meant. About the standards that this organization held and would continue to hold regardless of what game was coming next or what the standings looked like. And then he said the words that gave this moment its full weight. We cannot continue like this. Here is the impossible situation that Roberts and his team now faced. The Mets were still coming. The game was still scheduled. The lineup card, minus the two players whose status was now in question for reasons that had nothing to do with the original tactical decision, still needed to be filled. Baseball does not pause for internal crises. The schedule is indifferent to the emotional state of the teams competing within it. And so a team that had just experienced a genuine rupture in its internal fabric, a moment of real ugliness that had exposed fault lines nobody had fully acknowledged, now had to walk onto a field and perform at the highest level against one of the most capable opponents on their schedule. The remaining players in that clubhouse had to make a choice. Not a dramatic, cinematic choice. A quiet, professional choice that nobody outside the stadium would ever fully see or appreciate. The choice to take what had happened, absorb its weight, and then set it aside, not pretend it didn't happen, not minimize its significance, but functionally separate it from the task at hand and compete with everything they had. Ohtani, as he always does in moments that would destabilize most people, made that choice with a clarity that left no room for doubt. He returned to his preparation. His pre-game routine, meticulous and unchanging regardless of external circumstances, continued exactly as it always continued. The violated equipment was dealt with. A new setup was arranged. And Ohtani moved through his preparation with the focused calm of someone who had said what needed to be said, drawn the line that needed to be drawn, and was now entirely present for the work. The team watched him do this. And the team understood something important from watching it. Championships are not built only in the moments of triumph. They are built, or they fail to be built, in moments exactly like this one. In the moments where a team faces something genuinely difficult, genuinely ugly, genuinely threatening to the cohesion that winning at the highest level requires. In the moments where character is not something you talk about in spring training speeches but something you are required to actually demonstrate in real time with real consequences. The two players who destroyed Ohtani's equipment made a choice in a moment of rage that revealed something true about where they were, not as baseball players, but as people navigating the psychological complexity of professional competition in proximity to someone whose greatness is reordering everything around them. That revelation is painful. For them. For the team. For an organization that had invested in them and believed in them and is now facing consequences that nobody in that building wanted. Robert's words, "We cannot continue like this," were not just about this incident. They were about everything this incident represented. About the standards that must exist if a team is going to compete for what this team is competing for. About the simple, non-negotiable truth that talent without character is a house built without a foundation. Ohtani's 7 words were not anger. They were clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from a person who knows exactly who he is, exactly what he will accept, and exactly where the line is that cannot be crossed without permanent consequence. He will play the Mets game. He will be prepared in the way he is always prepared. He will compete with everything he has in a way that makes the drama of the last 24 hours feel, to anyone watching him play, like it belongs to a different world entirely. Because for Ohtani, it does. His world is the preparation. The work. The at-bat. The pitch. The routine that continues regardless of what breaks around it. Everything else is just noise. And Ohtani has never once let the noise win.